Now, one of the things that we talk about are exclusive versus concurrent powers. Exclusive powers are those powers that are exercised by the national government, and only by the national government. Examples include to declare war, regulate international trade, make treaties with foreign nations, regulate immigration, deport illegal aliens, those things that only the national government can do that affect the entire nation as a whole in some way, shape, or form, those are exclusive. Concurrent powers, however, are powers that can be exercised by both the national government and the state government, and they can be exercised simultaneously, in conjunction with another, or independently of each other. Examples of concurrent powers include levying and collecting taxes, borrowing money, spending for the public welfare, creating and enforcing laws, as well as adjudicating and punishing criminals. For example, in Georgia, you have to pay both federal income tax to the national government and state income tax to Georgia's government. Not all states have a state income tax. Some states choose instead to have a state sales tax or a state property tax that's a higher percentage. They can also borrow money, which is why some states, like California, get in huge debt crises, and also spending for the public welfare. Now, a lot of times the money's coming from the federal government, but it's up to the states to determine how that money's spent within the restrictions of the federal government. Creating and enforcing laws. If you think about it, there are federal laws and state laws that we all have to abide by. And there are federal police and state police that we have to deal with. If you ever get caught downloading music illegally on your computer, then you know very well that that's a federal law. And if you watch a DVD at the very beginning and it talks about copyright, and that illegally recording of this DVD is in violation of federal laws, then you could get sent to federal prison for that. And if you think about in terms of courts, there are federal courts, there are state courts, there are federal police. Think of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, and there are state police, for example, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and there are federal prisons and state prisons. So these are exclusive and concurrent powers. Exclusive, limited only to the national government, and concurrent, exercised by both the national and the state governments. It didn't take long after the ratification of the Constitution in 1790 for there to be problems between which power was supreme, the national power or the state power. Now, Article 6, Section 2 of the Constitution tried to determine that the U.S. Constitution was the supreme law of the land, and we refer to this as the Supremacy Clause. Now, in disputes regarding state law and federal law, it all goes back to what the Constitution states. But the Constitution did not clearly state that if a conflict arose between the national government and the state government, which side won. In disputes where nationals and states are disagreeing in terms of who's right and who's wrong, it's up to the Supreme Court to determine how the Constitution applies in a given situation. Remember, the Constitution was ratified in 1790, but by 1810, we'd already had Supreme Court cases that were questioning and challenging federal and state powers. In the case of Fletcher versus Peck, the Supreme Court determined that they had the right to rule whether or not a state law was constitutional. And by 1819, in the case of McCulloch versus Maryland, the Supreme Court ruled that states did not have power over the national government, that if a federal property was in the state, they did not have the right to tax that property, that ultimately the federal government was supreme over state governments. They also ruled that the Supreme Court had the right to hold states accountable to those federal laws. There's a lot of controversy over these issues, and it's interesting to see how some of this plays out in contemporary situations. For example, this past November, States like Colorado and Washington legalized marijuana. However, it is on the federal banned substances list. So on the one hand, the states are trying to legalize it and tax it and regulate it, but on the other hand, it is still illegal at the national level. So even though someone in Colorado may legally argue they have the right to have pot or smoke pot, at the federal level, they do not have that right.